Hello everyone, myself Dr. Sushmita Deshpande. I am Part 3 MDS student in Bharati Vidyapeeth Dental College, Pune. Firstly, a very big thank you to Dr. Shrikant sir. I was a part of MDS Conquer and the result of that is today I am pursuing post graduation, that too in my favorite branch, that is endodontics. Really a very big thank you to Dr. Shrikant sir for giving us this huge platform in order to present the lecture. So now coming to my lecture topic, that is endoperio lesions. This topic is important not only from academic point of view but also from clinical point of view. Endoperio lesions, they are routinely encountered in clinical practice. Hence it is very important for us to know how these lesions they are formed, how can we diagnose them and how can we successfully manage them. So I will begin with the topic. Now both these tissues, that is the endodontic tissue and the periodontal tissues, they are interrelated to each other. We all are knowing that the pulpal and the periodontal interrelationship is a very unique one and one can consider them as a single continuous system or as one biological unit. Pulp and the periodontium, they have embryonic, anatomic and functional interrelationship with each other. Now let us understand how embryonically, functionally and anatomically these two tissues they are interrelated to each other. During embryologic development of the tooth or the tooth germ, dental follicle, which is the precursor of periodontium, it is in close relationship with the dental papilla, from which arises the dental pulp. They are separated only by Hertwig epithelial root sheath cells prior to root formation. Thus, there is a definite embryonic interrelationship between the two structures. Then, there is an apical foramen, that is a major pathway of communication between the two structures. There is direct vascular communication between pulp and the periodontium through the apical foramen. Thus, functionally as well as anatomically, these two tissues they are interrelated to one another. Now the relationship between the periodontal and pulpal disease, it was first described by Semring and Goldberg in 1964 as pulpodontic periodontic syndrome, and endoperio lesion or the pulpodontic periodontic syndrome, it accounts for more than 50% of tooth mortality. Now since the term endoperio lesion has been used to describe the lesion due to inflammatory products found in various degrees in the pulpal tissue or in the periodontium. Now, pulpodontic periodontic syndrome can be initiated by either pulpal or periodontal disease and it may manifest as pulpal and periodontal symptoms. Then how are these two tissues they are intercommunicating with each other? Now there are various pathways or there are various routes of communication between the pulp and the periodontium. All these pathways of communication they act as bridge for microorganisms and thus it is responsible for causing the dissemination of infection from one site to another. Also various nutrients, metabolites, enzymes, they pass from the pulpal tissue into the periodontium as well as from the periodontium into the pulpal tissue. Now there are various pathways of communication between the pulpal tissue and the periodontal tissue. First are the pathways of developmental origin which are naturally present in between the two structures. First among that is the apical foramen. It is the principal route of communication between the pulp and the periodontium. Now the blood supply which occurs or which is present between the two tissues, that is via the apical foramen. It is the inferior alveolar artery and veins and nerve which is responsible for maintaining the blood supply of the pulpal tissue and of the periodontal tissues. Because of this blood supply, various nutrients, various metabolites, various enzymes, they can move from one site to another and hence maintain the nutrition of both the tissues. But Since the apical foramen is present, it is not only of nutritional value, it can also cause the spread of disease from one side to another, as microbial and inflammatory byproducts, then various antigens, there are various bacterial enzymes and various bacterial metabolites. They can readily pass through this apical foramen and they can initiate an inflammatory response in the periodontal tissue. Thus, this will cause the destruction of the periodontium, especially of the periodontal ligament fibers, and that will eventually result in resorption of adjacent alveolar bone. Thus, apical foramen is the potential portal for entry of various inflammatory byproducts from the periodontal pocket into the pulp. Then coming to next pathway of communication, that is accessory canal or lateral canal. An accessory canal is a branch of the main canal or chamber that communicates with the external root surface. A lateral canal is also a type of accessory canal located in the coronal or middle third of the root, usually extending horizontally from the main canal space. Furcation canal is an accessory canal located in the furcation. Now you can appreciate in the image that how this lateral canal and apical canal and furcation canals, how are they present. Now nowadays we use the term accessory canal, which is used to describe any ramification or any communication that is connecting the root canal system to the periodontal ligament. Now why do we see that the endoperial lesions, they are more commonly seen in posterior teeth than in anterior teeth? Because the number of accessory canals, they are more in molar teeth than in anterior teeth. More amount of endoperial lesions, they are encountered in posterior teeth. So what are these accessory canals? They contain connective tissue and blood vessels that connect the circulatory system of the pulp with that of the periodontium. Thus, they can again act as a source of inflammation to cause the infection spread from the pulpal tissue into the periodontal tissue. Coming to third pathway, that is the exposed dentinal tubules. Now we all are knowing the fact that the cementum is covering the root surface. Now the cementum, it prevents the spread of intracanal pathogens to the periodontal tissues. If the dentinal tubules, they get exposed because of the loss of cementum, because of any reason, because of either developmental defects which may be present in the cementum, then these exposed dentinal tubules, they act as a viable pathway between the pulp and the periodontal ligament. Now this exposure of dentinal tubule, it can occur as a result of developmental defect, disease, or because of any periodontal or surgical procedure. When cementum and enamel, they do not meet with each other at the CJ, the tubules in between this gap, they will remain exposed, thus creating pathway of communication between pulpal tissue and periodontal tissues. Thus there will be flow of fluids and irritants from the patent dentinal tubules, and thus there will be exposure of pulp to the oral environment via the gingival sulcus or the periodontal pocket. Coming to permeability of cementum. Now it is very important for us to understand that even though cementum is present, intact cementum is not an effective barrier to prevent the penetration of various irritants from pulp to the periodontal tissue or vice versa. Then it was Carranza who found that in some areas of the cellular cementum, there are canaliculi present, as you can appreciate in this diagram. Canaliculi are present, and these canaliculi, they are continuous with the dentinal tubules. Thus, the cementum can act as a positive mediator for exposing the dentinal tubules and create a pathway between pulp and the periodontium. Then coming to the next pathway of communication, that is the developmental grooves. Now how these developmental grooves, they are formed? That is because of the failure of the tooth germ to form another root. As long as there is an epithelial attachment remains intact, the periodontium, it will remain healthy. But once this attachment is breached and grew, when it is contaminated by bacteria, a self-sustaining infrabony pocket will be formed along its entire length. Then, now this groove, it will act as a nidus for accumulation of bacteria, for accumulation of biofilm, and thus it will act as a pathway for progression of the periodontal disease. Now groove which is present, it begins in the central fossa of maxillary central incisor or lateral incisor. Then it will cross the cingulum and it will continue apically for varying distance. Now, it is commonly seen that the palatogingival groove, the patient is associated with poor periodontal health because patient is unable to maintain this area clean. Radiographically, you will see that there will be bone destruction which is following the course of the groove. Then prognosis of this type of developmental groove, it is generally guarded because if the apical extent of the groove is too much extensive, it is generally associated with a huge amount of bone loss, and hence when this type of grooves they are diagnosed, many a times extraction is needed. Now if we are planning to treat these type of grooves, then it is very important to note that only doing scaling and root planing will not suffice. Surgical approach is very much necessary, and then placing a bony substitute is necessary. Apart from that, even soft tissue management of the overlying soft tissue is very important. Then coming to enamel projections and enamel pearls. So enamel projections and pearls are projections of enamel that extend into root furcation. So now these enamel projections and enamel pearls, they have an accessory canal which is present in the furcation area. So these accessory canals then again act as a pathway for causing the spread of infection from the pulpal tissue into the periodontal tissue and from the periodontal tissue into the pulpal tissue. Then coming to next pathway, that is the pathway of pathological origin. So coming to the first pathway of pathological origin, that is first among that is empty spaces created by destroyed Sharpey's fibers. Now Sharpey's fibers originating from both the cementum and alveolar bone, they are organized in the form of bundles and they course the area of the periodontal ligament. These fibers, they get mineralized during the gradual process of apposition of cementum. Now coming to permeability of cementum, now it is very important for us to understand that even though cementum is present, intact cementum is not an effective barrier to prevent the penetration of various irritants from pulp to the periodontal tissue or vice versa. Then it was Carranza who found that in some areas of the cellular cementum there are. Next is crown root fracture, which that is caused by trauma. Now whenever there is trauma to the teeth and alveolar bone, it may involve the pulp and the periodontal ligament directly or indirectly. Now the trauma that can be classified as enamel fracture, crown fracture without pulp involvement, crown fracture with pulpal involvement, crown root fracture, luxation and avulsion. Now the treatment, it will depend upon the severity of fracture and it may range from only removing the fractured tooth fragment and restoration to endodontic and periodontal or surgical procedures along with splinting. Prognosis is poor, sometimes even extraction is needed. Now vertical root fracture can also occur because of trauma and it is associated with non-vital as well as vital teeth. Now vertical root fracture is pathogenic communication between the pulpal tissue and the periodontal tissue. Coming to the next pathway of communication, that is the root resorption. Now the root resorption can be either physiological root resorption or pathological root resorption that causes loss of dentine, cementum or bone. Now the physiological resorption which occurs normally during the shedding of the deciduous teeth and eruption of the permanent teeth. While the pathological resorption is again classified into two types. Grossly this classification is that is internal root resorption and external root resorption. External root resorption, it mainly affects the external surface of the tooth, while the internal root resorption, it starts within the pulpal space and it affects primarily the internal dentinal walls. Now, if not diagnosed properly, the external root resorption may invade the cementum, dentine and the pulp, while if it is left unnoticed, the internal root resorption can perforate the external root surface. Then coming to pathways of iatrogenic origin, these includes the exposure of dentinal tubules following root planing, and second is the perforation during axis planing. Coming to the first, that is exposure of dentinal tubules following root planing. Now this is an iatrogenically, this lesion can occur because of this mechanism. Then during normal scaling and root planing, we not only remove the bacterial deposits, but we also remove some part of cementum and some part of superficial dentine, it is removed. Because of this procedure, there is exposure of the dentinal tubules, and hence there is increase in the fluid movement as the nerve fibers in the dentinal tubules, they are sensitized. So because of this exposure of the dentinal tubules, there is microbial invasion in the dentinal tubules, resulting in inflammation of the pulp, and also the reverse process can also occur, that is the periodontal tissues can also get inflamed. Then coming to the next pathway of iatrogenic origin, that is perforation. Now perforation, it is a communication between the root canal system and the periradicular tissue, including the periodontal ligament or the oral cavity. Now the prognosis of this perforation, it depends upon the size of the perforation, where it is present, and what is the time of diagnosis. If it is diagnosed at an earlier point of time, it is definitely having a good prognosis. And what is the degree of periodontal damage, and how well can the perforation be sealed. Then coming to etiological factors and contributing factors. Now this is a very important diagram which tells us regarding the various etiological factors and contributing factors. The entire all the etiological factors and contributing factors, they are enlisted very well in this diagram. So there are certain living pathogens. So coming to living pathogens, we all are very well knowing the fact that bacteria, they play a very important role in formation as well as in the progression of both endodontic and periodontal diseases. Now there are various bacteria like Aggregator-Bacter, Actinomycetes comitans, Treponema denticoli, Prevotella intermedia, Porphyromonas gingivalis, T. frostria, which are responsible to cause endodontic lesion as well as periodontal lesion. Then coming to spirochetes, T. denticoli and T. maltophyllum, they are the class of spirochetes which are associated with both endodontic and periodontal disease. Then coming to fungi, most commonly associated fungi is the Candida albicans. It is very commonly seen associated with asymptomatic apical periodontitis. It is seen failing root canal treatment. It is seen in periradicular tissues, and it is also seen associated with untreated root caries. Thus all these type of microorganisms, they have association with endoperiolesions. Then coming to viruses, herpes simplex virus, it is seen in the gingival crevice. Human cytomegalovirus, it is seen in the gingival pocket. Then Epstein-Barr virus type 1, it is seen in the pocket. Then the presence of virus in the dental pulp, it was first reported in a patient with AIDS. HIV DNA was also detected in periradicular lesions. Now it is very important to note here that herpes simplex, it is unlikely to be associated with endodontic and periodontal disease. But the other species of viruses, that is the human cytomegalovirus and Epstein-Barr virus, they are definitely associated with symptomatic periradicular lesions. Then there are active infections. Now how these viruses, they are responsible to cause the endoperio lesion. Whenever there is an active infection in the periradicular tissue, there is production of array of cytokines and chemokines. These cytokines and chemokines, these are the inflammatory mediators. They induce an immunosuppression and they are responsible to cause the tissue destruction. Because of activation of inflammatory cells in the periradicular tissue by herpes virus, there will be an impaired host defense mechanism, and this will give rise to overgrowth of bacteria which is seen in the periodontal lesion. So in this way the viruses, they are responsible to cause the endoperiolesion lesion. Then coming to biofilm, biofilm is defined as sessile multicellular microbial community characterized by cells that are firmly attached to a surface and embedded in a self-produced matrix of extracellular polymeric substances. Now bacteria that are present in the biofilm, they have a defensive life strategy and they can survive in extremely hostile environment like in extreme heat, very acidic pH, then extreme dryness, nutrition depleted areas. Now biofilms, they are resistant to antibiotics, but the exact role of presence of biofilm and the endoperiolesion lesion, it is not fully elucidated. Then coming to non-living pathogens, there are certain extrinsic pathogens and certain intrinsic pathogens. Extrinsic pathogen, it includes the dentine and the cementum chips, amalgam, root canal filling materials, cellulose fibers from absorbent paper points, gingival retraction cords, leguminous foods and calculus-like deposits. All these extrinsic factors, they are basically responsible to evoke a foreign body response, and the clinical features associated with them can be either chronic or acute, and they may be symptomatic or asymptomatic. Then microscopically, as you can see in the left side image, there will be a foreign body type of reaction which can be appreciated by the presence of multicellular giant cells which are surrounding the foreign body, and this thus resulting in chronic inflammation. Now the treatment of this type of pathogenesis, it is that the surgical removal of the foreign body. Then coming to living pathogens, we all are very well knowing the fact that bacteria, they play a very important role in formation as well as in the progression of both endodontic and periodontal diseases. Now there are various bacteria like Aggregator-Bacter actinomycetocomitans, Treponema denticoli, Prevotella intermedia, Porphyromonas gingivalis, T. frostria, which are responsible to cause endodontic lesion as well as periodontal lesion. Then coming to cholesterol crystals, Russell bodies, Russian bodies and charcoal leaden crystals. Now these all whatever I am mentioning right now is not there in Carranza or many of the endodontic books. This is all taken from various articles. So all these crystals and various extrinsic pathogens which are present, they are associated with presence of non-healing periradicular lesions, and when the surgical flap was raised and the tissue was removed, the microscopic examination has shown their presence. Now the cholesterol crystals, they are released by disintegrating erythrocytes from the stagnant blood vessel, lymphocytes, plasma cells, and macrophages. Then, then there are various contributing factors to the formation of endoperioral lesion. First among that is poor endodontic treatment. Now, non-surgical root canal treatment, as we all know, it is having a very predictable success rate. Now, it is very important for us to clean the canal, shape the canal, and obturate the canal very well in order to enhance the successful outcome. Poor endodontic treatment, it can lead to endodontic infection as well as periodontal lesion it can cause. Now, though the poor endodontic treatment, it is a definite cause of endoperioral lesion, it can be very well managed by either an orthograde approach or by retrograde approach with the help of advanced armamentarium. Then coming to poor restoration, then because the coronal seal is not very good, it can cause the leakage of various microbial products along the entire length of the periodontal ligament, and this can lead to a new infection in the root canal system, or it can lead to a new infection in the periradicular tissue, or it can lead to a endoperioral lesion which is difficult to manage. So it is very crucial that the obturated root canal system is having a very good coronal seal. Next is crown root fracture, which that is caused by trauma. Now, whenever there is trauma to the teeth and alveolar bone, it may involve the pulp and the periodontal ligament directly or indirectly. Now, the trauma that can be classified as enamel fracture, crown fracture without pulp involvement, crown fracture with pulpal involvement, crown root fracture, luxation, and avulsion. Now, the treatment, it will depend upon the severity of fracture, and it may range from only removing the fractured tooth fragment and restoration to endodontic and periodontal or surgical procedures along with splinting. Prognosis is poor, sometimes even extraction is needed. Now, vertical root fracture can also occur because of trauma. First classification, which is very famous classification given by Simon et al. In 1972. This classification is even followed today, that is primary endodontic lesion with secondary periodontal involvement, primary periodontal lesions with secondary endodontic involvement, and true combined lesion. Then another classification recommended by the World Workshop for Classification of Periodontal Diseases, it was given in the year 1999. Periodontitis associated with endodontic disease, endodontic periodontal lesion, periodontal endodontic lesion, combined lesion. Coming to Grossman's classification in 1991, type 1 requiring endodontic treatment only, type 2 requiring periodontal treatment only, type 3 requiring combined endo-perio treatment. Then coming to biofilm, biofilm is defined as sessile multicellular microbial community characterized by cells that are firmly attached to a surface and embedded in a self-produced matrix of extracellular polymeric substances. Class 3, tooth that has no pulpal problem but requires endodontic therapy with root amputation to receive periodontal healing. Class 4, tooth that clinically and radiographically stimulate pulpal and periodontal diseases but in fact has periodontal disease. Then Torabinajad and Trope in 1996, they gave a classification of endoperioral lesion based upon the origin of the periodontal pocket, endodontic origin, periodontal origin, combined endoperioral lesion, separate endodontic and periodontal lesions, lesions with communication and lesions without communication. Then coming to spirochetes, T. denticola and T. maltophyllum, they are the class of spirochetes which are associated with both endodontic and periodontal disease. Primary periodontal lesion with secondary endodontic involvement, combined endodontic periodontal lesion, and iatrogenic periodontal lesions. Now, we will see how the pulpal disease affects the periodontium. Now, if the long-standing pulpal disease, if it is present, There will be contamination of the root canal system with bacteria. Then there will be loss of the vasculature and loss of the blood supply to the pulpal tissues. Then there will be necrosis of the pulp, and this will eventually result in formation of a periapical abscess. Now this abscess, they have the tendency to drain through pathway of the least resistance. Now so it may drain through the gingival sulcus and it may produce a periodontal pocket. Then so there will be formation of fistula, which is traveling through the periodontal ligament in a coronal direction, and then it will open up into the gingival sulcus. Or this periapical abscess, it will drain through the accessory canals which are present in the furcation area, and then again the fistula will travel in the coronal direction from the furcation, and then it will open up into the gingival sulcus. So in this way there is formation of a pocket. This pocket, it is having the reverse direction to the conventional pocket. Conventional pocket, it starts forming from coronal direction or cervical 1/3 of the tooth to the apical 1/3 of the tooth. But in case of reverse pocket formation, which is formed as a result of the pulpal disease, it is having a reverse direction. It is progressing from apical 1/3 to the coronal 1/3. Hence it is known as reverse pocket formation. And this periodontitis, it is known as retrograde periodontitis. Now this is in the reverse direction of the orthograde periodontitis, which is occurring from cervical direction to coronal apical direction. Then coming to effect of periodontal disease on the pulp. Now there are two different school of thoughts regarding the effect of the periodontal disease on the pulp. When there is a periodontal disease, there are many authors who say that when there is a periodontal disease present, it definitely affects the pulpal health. And because of the presence of the periodontal disease, there are certain atrophic and degenerative changes in the pulp occurring, like the calcification of the pulp chamber or the calcification of the pulpal system, or there may occur fibrosis of the pulp. But mostly these are all the reparative changes rather than being inflammatory changes. But there are certain authors who say that the periodontal disease will not have any kind of effect on the pulp as long as the blood supply to the pulp is maintained by the apical foramen. So if the blood supply through the apical foramen, it remains intact, pulp is capable of withstanding any kind of physiological insults which may be induced as a result of the periodontal disease. So when the periodontal inflammation, it is present, it can spread through various apical foramen and lateral canal to the pulp, and hence this is known as retrograde pulpitis, which is again of the reverse direction of pulpitis, which occurs from the coronal direction to apical direction. But in case when the periodontal disease is present and it results in infection of the pulp, it is known as retrograde pulpitis. Then coming to diagnosis. Now since the diagnosis of endoperio lesion, it is a bit difficult. In initial cases, like if only pure endodontic lesion if it is present, or a pure periodontal lesion if it is present, it is relatively easier to diagnose this isolated lesions. But as the disease is progressing, there is a overlapping of various features, especially the radiographic features, and then the diagnosis, it becomes critical. So now I will be telling regarding the various diagnostic aids which should be used in order to arise at a correct diagnosis regarding the endoperio lesion. So the first diagnostic tool is the visual examination. Meticulous visual examination regarding the caries, regarding presence of calculus, regarding presence of developmental defects should be done. Presence or absence of plaque and calculus should be noted. Alveolar mucosa, the attached gingiva, they should be noted for inflammation, ulceration. Sinus tract should be noticed. Then coming to the next, that is palpation. Now in case of the palpation, the palpation is done by applying firm digital pressure to mucosa against the underlying cortical bone. This will detect the underlying periarticular abnormalities or any hot zones that produce painful response to digital pressure. Then coming to percussion, this test will not help us to diagnose the condition of the pulp, but it will help us to diagnose the periradicular inflammation. Positive response, it indicates that there is inflammation of the periodontal ligament, and that may be either of pulpal origin or of periodontal origin. Now, why the positive response on percussion test is given? That is because of the sensitivity of proprioceptive fibers which are present in the inflamed periodontal ligament. This will help us to identify or localize the pain. Now, coming to next diagnostic test, that is the mobility. The mobility is directly proportional to the integrity of attachment apparatus or to the extent of the inflammation in the periodontal ligament. Hypermobility, it is common in primary endodontic lesion, and it should not be confused with true mobility caused because of the periodontal destruction. In case of primary endodontic pathology, mobility, it will resolve within a week after initiation of the endodontic treatment. Then coming to the radiographic diagnosis, once the radiograph is taken, it should be noted where is the lesion exactly present, whether it is present in the apical part of the root or it is present laterally, what is the extent of the lesion, and how much bone loss has occurred. Then coming to fistula tracking, this is really very important in order to diagnose the endoperio lesion. When the inflammatory exudate it is present, it will drain itself through the pathway of least resistance, and hence it will open up into the gingiva or the vestibule. Now, how is this fistula tracking done? It is done by inserting a semi-rigid or radio-opaque material into the sinus tract until the resistance is met. This is done with the help of either gutta-percha point or a pre-softened silver cone. An IOPA is taken when that will reveal the origin of the sinus tract. When coming to pulp testing, mostly the true pulp testing is not possible. It is only pulp sensitivity testing. Then mostly negative response is indicative of necrosed pulp, and lingering response is indicative of irreversible pulpitis. Then coming to periodontal probing, this is again very important in case of endoperio. Now, when and localized swelling if you are encountering into the gingival sulcus, it is very difficult for us to know whether this swelling is of periodontal origin or whether it is of endodontic origin. And most of these swellings, they are present on the labial side of the tooth. Now, in case of lesion of endodontic origin, the swelling is present when the sulcus it is probed. There is usually normal sulcus depth all around the tooth until the swelling is probed. At the edge of the swelling, the probe drops significantly to the level of the root apex, and there is a narrow probing depth it is present, which remains to the full width of the swelling. As the opposite edge of the swelling it is probed, now again there is a normal probing depth. Now this swelling, it can be characterized as having blown out the entire attachment on that side. This is only seen in case of primary endodontic lesions, typical sign of primary endodontic lesion. And once the root canal treatment it is completed, complete healing of the periodontal attachment will occur, and this probing depth it will also disappear. Then coming to the typical periodontal probing. Now, in case of periodontitis, a typical type of probing it is seen, that is the bone loss, it begins from the crestal bone and it progresses apically. Then the lesion is conical in contour. Here the prognosis, it will depend upon the periodontal therapy and the degree of damage to the bone has occurred. Then coming to viruses, herpes simplex virus, it is seen in the gingival crevice. Human cytomegalovirus, it is seen in the gingival pocket. Then Epstein-Barr virus type 1, it is seen in the pocket. Then the presence of virus in the dental pulp, it was first reported in a patient with AIDS. HIV DNA was also detected in periradicular lesions. Now, it is very important to note here that herpes simplex, it is unlikely to be associated with endodontic and periodontal disease. But the other species of viruses, that is the human cytomegalovirus and Epstein-Barr virus, they are definitely associated with symptomatic periradicular lesions. Then there are active infections. Now, how these viruses they are responsible to cause the endoperiolesion lesion. Whenever there is an active infection in the periradicular tissue, there is production of array of cytokines and chemokines. These cytokines and chemokines, these are the inflammatory mediators. They induce an immunosuppression and they are responsible to cause the tissue destruction. Because of activation of inflammatory cells in the periradicular tissue by herpes virus, there will be an impaired host defense mechanism, and this will give rise to overgrowth of bacteria which is seen in the periodontal lesion. Now, how will you diagnose this primary endodontic lesion? On visual examination, you will see that the soft tissue, it is having presence of sinus opening, presence of deep carious lesion, it has a defective restoration, previous root canal treatment, cracks, discoloration, adhesion, erosion, abrasions. Pain in this type of lesion, this is very important to be noted. Sharp type of pain is present. On palpation, it will not help us to identify whether the inflammatory process is of endodontic or periodontal origin. And on percussion, it will be positive. That is, painful response will be elicited on percussion test. Then pulp vitality, either it will give a no response indicative of necrotic pulp, or it will give a lingering response on electrical pulp testing indicative of irreversible pulpitis. Then periodontal probing, a deep narrow solitary pocket which is present in the absence of periodontal disease. Now this is very important to be differentiated from vertical root fracture. In case of vertical root fracture, though narrow probing depth is present, there is presence of other signs like multiple sinus openings are present. So in this way they can be differentiated from vertical root fracture. Sinus tracing, the sinus tract or the GP point will point towards the apex of the root or lateral canal or furcation of molars. Now the radiographic features, as you can see the radiographically, there will be a deep caries lesion, or there may be defective restoration, or there may be improperly done root canal treatment, or there is association of any endodontic mishap, or root fracture or root resorption may be present along with periapical radiolucency. Then coming to the treatment of primary endodontic lesion. Now these type of lesion, they usually heal followed by after the root canal treatment. Now the root canal treatment, it should be done in multiple visit endodontics, and calcium hydroxide dressing should be given in order to ensure that the healing of the periapical lesion it occurs. Invasive periodontal procedure should not be done because it can cause further injury to the attachment apparatus and it can possibly delay the healing. Generally the healing of primary endodontic lesion, it occurs in 3 to 6 months. Then coming to next, that is primary endodontic lesion with secondary periodontal involvement. If after a period of time, if the primary endodontic lesion it remains untreated, it may then become secondarily involved and there may be infection of the periodontal tissue as well, leading to the periodontal breakdown. Once the plaque it starts accumulating at the margins of the sinus tract, it leads to periodontitis. Now once the plaque and calculus they are present, then the treatment and also the prognosis of the tooth, it is different, as it is different from the primary endodontic lesion. Now the tooth now needs both endodontic treatment as well as periodontal treatment. This type of lesion, they are generally associated with root perforation during root canal treatment, or when posts are not placed properly during the coronal restoration. Root fracture can also be associated with primary endodontic lesion with secondary periodontal involvement. Then how will you primary periodontal lesion with secondary endodontic involvement, combined endodontic periodontal lesion and iatrogenic periodontal lesions. Then coming to viruses, herpes simplex virus, it is seen in the gingival crevice. Human cytomegalovirus, it is seen in the gingival pocket. Then Epstein-Barr virus type 1, it is seen in the pocket. Then the presence of virus in the dental pulp, it was first reported in a patient with AIDS. HIV DNA was also detected in periradicular lesions. Now, it is very important to note here that herpes simplex, it is unlikely to be associated with endodontic and periodontal disease. But then radiographically you can see that there is a deep carious lesion, defective restoration, previously done poor root canal treatment, endodontic mishaps, root fracture or root resorption with wide base radiolucency which is present around the root. As you can see in this radiographic images that there is a deeply placed restoration is present and which is also associated with bone loss. Then coming to the treatment of this type of lesion, first initially the endodontic therapy is given and a simple hygiene therapy it is recommended. Multiple visit endodontics again here should be performed with intracanal medicament of calcium hydroxide in order to reduce the inflammation and in order to favor the repair. Now the treatment results, they must be evaluated for 3 to 4 months and then the periodontal therapy it should be considered. The sequence of treatment, it should allow sufficient time for initial healing of the tissue and for better assessment of the periodontal condition. It has been suggested that aggressive removal of the periodontal ligament and underlying cementum during the endodontic therapy, it may adversely affect the periodontal healing and hence it should be avoided. Because what happens is, if we are planning to do the periodontal therapy, it can introduce bacteria during the initial phase of periodontal healing. Early initiation of the endodontic treatment ensures that the cementum layer it is kept intact and there is no exposure of the dentine. So the chances of root resorption they are decreased. So always first the endodontic therapy should be done and the healing should be watched. Then but if after doing the root canal treatment even after 3 months there is no periodontal healing seen, then periodontal therapy should definitely be performed. Now and if we are seeing that there is no healing occurring and then if we are not planning for the periodontal treatment, then the lesion will heal only to the point that the periodontal disease it is present. Now in case of perforation, if it is present in primary endo-secondary periolesion, then the perforation should be sealed with a proper material like MTA or biodentine. Then with the help of various advancements, now even with the perforated tooth the prognosis is better. Like in this case there was the sinus tracing is done at the furcation area. There was no root canal treatment done and the crown was placed. So first initially the root canal treatment was completed and it was noted that there was no healing occurring in the furcation area as it could be appreciated in the second radiographic image here. So periodontal therapy was also performed and then the healing was initiated. Now again this is one more case where you can see that the crown was given but there was no healing seen. So the flap was raised and large amount of plaque and calculus could be seen associated with the root, which was removed completely by the curettage. And then the primary periodontal lesion with secondary endodontic involvement, combined endodontic periodontal lesion and iatrogenic periodontal lesions. Then radiographically you can see that there is a deep carious lesion, defective restoration, previously done poor root canal treatment, endodontic mishaps, root fracture or root resorption with wide base radiolucency which is present around the root. As you can see in this radiograph, pain is usually dull aching type of pain. Acute pain is present only in uh, sharp pain is present only in acute condition. Now this is a differentiating point between the endodontic lesion and periodontal lesion. In endodontic lesion, sharp shooting type of pain is seen, but in case of periodontal lesion, dull aching type of pain is seen. Then pain on palpation is present and the percussion test is positive. Mobility, it is ranging from localized mobility to generalized mobility. On vitality testing, with the help of EPT, the pulp is generally vital and it responds to the testing. Sinus tracking, the GP points towards the lateral aspect of the root. Radiographically, you will see that there is a vertical bone loss. This is a typical sign of a primary periodontal lesion, and the bone loss, it is wider coronally, as you can see in the radiographic image. Now, we will see how the pulpal disease it affects the periodontium. Now, if the long-standing pulpal disease, if it is present, there will be contamination of the root canal system with bacteria. Then there will be loss of the vasculature and loss of the blood supply to the pulpal tissues. Then there will be necrosis of the pulp, and this will eventually result in formation of a periapical abscess. Now the abscess, they have the tendency to drain through pathway of the least resistance. Now so it may drain through the gingival sulcus and it may produce a periodontal pocket. Then so there will be formation of fistula, which is traveling through the periodontal ligament in a coronal direction, and then it will open up into the gingival sulcus. Or this periapical abscess, it will drain through the accessory canals which are present in the furcation area, and then again the fistula will travel in the coronal direction from the furcation, and then it will open up into the lesions. Then coming to viruses, herpes simplex virus, it is seen in the gingival crevice. Human cytomegalovirus, it is seen in the gingival pocket. Then Epstein-Barr virus type 1, it is seen in the pocket. Then the presence of virus in the dental pulp, it was first reported in a patient with AIDS. HIV DNA was also detected in periradicular lesions. Now it is very important to note here that herpes simplex, it is unlikely to be associated with endodontic and periodontal disease. But the other species of viruses, that is the human cytomegalovirus and Epstein-Barr virus, they are definitely associated with symptomatic periradicular lesions. Then there are active infections. Now how these viruses, they are responsible to cause the endoperio lesion. Whenever there is an active infection in the periradicular tissue, there is production of array of cytokines and chemokines. These cytokines and chemokines, these are the inflammatory mediators. They induce an immunosuppression and they are responsible to cause the tissue pain in this type of lesion. This is very important to be noted. Sharp type of pain is present. On palpation, it will not help us to identify whether the inflammatory process is of endodontic or periodontal. Pain is usually dull aching type of pain. Acute pain is present only in positive. Mobility, it is ranging from localized mobility to generalized mobility. On vitality testing, with the help of EPT, like in this case, there was the sinus tracing is done at the furcation area. There was no root canal treatment done and the crown was placed. So first initially, now how will you diagnose this primary endodontic lesion? On visual examination, you will see that the soft tissue, it is having presence of sinus opening, presence of deep carious lesion, it has a defective restoration, previous root canal treatment, cracks, discoloration, adhesion, erosion, abrasions. Now the combined lesions, it can be classified into three types. Tooth with two separate lesions, one endodontic usually periapical and one periodontal with no communication. Teeth with a single lesion that involves both endodontic and periodontal pathosis. Teeth with endodontic and periodontal lesions that were once separate but now communicate. On visual examination, plaque subgingival calculus is present, periodontitis it is present, and person exudate they are seen, and swelling is seen associated with multiple teeth. Pain is usually delaying type of pain and sharpshooting in case of acute condition. Pain on palpation is present and the tooth is tender on positive. Mobility, it is ranging from localized mobility to generalized mobility. On vitality testing, with the help of EPT, the pulp is generally vital and it responds to the testing. Sinus tracking, the GP points towards the lateral aspect. Now, how will you diagnose this primary endodontic lesion? On visual examination, you will see that the soft tissue, it is having presence of sinus opening, presence of deep carious lesion. It has a defect. Pain in this type of lesion, this is very important to be noted. Sharp type of pain is present. On palpation, it will not help us to identify whether the inflammatory process is of endodontic or periodontal origin. And on percussion, it will be positive. That is, painful response will be elicited on percussion test. Primary periodontal lesion. Primary periodontal lesion with secondary endodontic involvement. Combined endodontic periodontal lesion and iatrogenic periodontal lesions. Also, other type of surgeries can be done, like guided tissue regeneration can be done. Now, what is it can be explained with the help of these diagram. There was, as you can see in the lower right radiographic image, a large lesion could be seen associated with the tooth, even though the root canal therapy was done and it is a good properly obturated root canal, though and hence there was a large lesion, still it was present. So a flap was raised, curettage was done and a membrane was placed. Now this is a bioresorbable membrane in order to avoid a second periodontal surgery. Now what this membrane will do, it will prevent the contact of the connective tissue with the osseous wall of the defect. Thus it will protect the underlying blood clot and it will stabilize the wound. This will cause the periodontal reattachment and it will attract the cells from the alveolar crest and the new bone will be formed. Here again the same thing it is explained again. Radiographically a huge lesion could be seen and the sinus tract it is pointing towards the apical part of the tooth. So the flap was raised and again GTR membrane it was placed as it can be seen here, and then again the flap was closed and then the healing would be initiated and it could be seen radiographically. So coming to the conclusion, a perioendo lesion can have a varied pathogenesis which ranges from quite simple to relatively complex one. To make a correct diagnosis, the clinician should have a thorough understanding and scientific knowledge of these lesions. Primary periodontal lesion. Primary periodontal lesion with secondary endodontic involvement. Combined endodontic periodontal lesion and iatrogenic periodontal lesions.